Welcome everybody. Gonna put out right now a earthquake warning, earthquake forecast, earthquake prediction. Okay, we're looking at Earthquake 3D, which is this is the free edition. That this particular application software lets us look at things like magnitude and how old earthquakes are, and kind of the latest earthquakes right now. I have it set to 7 days, and magnitudes only show magnitudes of 5 or greater. I use this to just this app. I only use this only for predicting where the earthquake's going to happen. Okay, I use other data to predict the when. Okay, so just putting out right now that probably in the next 2 days to 2 weeks, I think we'll see a 6.0, maybe even a 6.5 earthquake. And I'm going to show you another graph that's going to help us zero in on the when and how I derive at the when. And then we'll talk about where do I think this earthquake is most likely to take place. So let's first talk about deriving when this earthquake takes place. Let's look at that right now. Okay, so this is just a chart of data, and here you can see some data, kind of a spreadsheet format. This is on Chart Studio Plotly. This is a free website. You can plot your data in here. You can use different types of charting. I'm just using a line chart, and then XY graph. You know, this is the X, this is the Y, and we're just plotting in the data. So vertically on the Y axis, this is this is solar flux. So solar flux, yep, this comes from the sun. So we're looking at sun data, solar flux that comes from the sun. That's this axis right here, the Y axis, okay? And you can see 0 would be that way, and infinity for solar flux would be that way, going up, right? And then down here is time, okay, which is being represented by dates. So here's May 5th over here, all the way out here, July 14th. All right, so you have an idea what's going on, right? So took the data, plotted in here. This column B is the solar flux. This is the date that solar flux was read. There's 3 readings per day. So that's why you kind of see this jagged graph going on here, the way the data is plotted. So anyways, not to spend too long on this, I've talked about this before, but I'll briefly mention it again for people who are new to this idea that the sun causes earthquakes. Yes, I know, oh my gosh, pound your keyboards. No, that's misinformation. What are you talking about? You're an idiot. No, it's true. The sun causes earthquakes. Yes, we have plate tectonics on the earth, and yes, they slip and they do all that stuff, but it's the sun that makes the plates slip. And the data that I've collected and looked at for well over a year now, 2 years, it's irrefutable that the sun's causing earthquakes, okay, at this point. So let me just talk briefly about where earthquakes take place and where they've taken place in the past. I've talked about these scenarios before. I'm just going to kind of go over them briefly, and then we'll talk about why I know, or at least have a high probability that we're going to see an earthquake soon. You can obviously see solar flux really came up here and peaked really hard up here. This was a solar storm. This whole area up here was like a week of solar storms. If you remember back in May, we were having those solar storms. There was the Aurora Borealis, there was green skies and blue skies and all that stuff. Everybody goes, ooh, ah, wow, nice, cool. That's what this all was, okay? Whenever you see peaks, except during solar storms, that's a little bit different. Whenever you see peaks and you come off a peak and the peak starts to roll over, like this one right here, you tend to get earthquakes. Here, as you come off the peak, you get an earthquake. Sometimes you get a peak. Sometimes you get earthquakes on this side of the peak. Sometimes you get them right at the peak, and sometimes you get them after the peak. But somewhere in this area, this umbrellaed area, same thing over here, you'll get usually, not always, but usually get an earthquake. a decent sized earthquake. And I'm to qualify, talk about 6.0 plus 6.0 or greater earthquakes, okay? Right, so anytime you come off these peaks like this, you tend to get earthquakes. Take note of this 180 solar flux on this chart. Anytime you see solar flux come from below and pass above 180, you tend to get earthquakes right in this area, right around 180. Anytime the solar flux comes back across 180 from above, you tend to get earthquakes there too. Not always, but it's common. All right. Now the solar flux has to get significantly below the 180 and significantly above 180 for this to get triggered. It can't just be hanging around 180. Like right in this area where you got this, you might have had an earthquake, you might not, because it didn't really get way above it, but it probably got above it enough. I'll have to go back and look at the data, but you probably had an earthquake in one of these two spots, okay? So that's two different scenarios we talked about. Anytime you come off of peaks, approach peaks at the peak or below the peak, as you're coming off of it, above it, at it, or below it, right in this area, you'll get earthquakes. Going above or coming below 180, you get earthquakes. So that's two scenarios, right? And the third scenario is anytime solar flux, let's just, for example, let's put down 130 way down here. It's not on this chart, but I'll just put 130 down here. Anytime solar flux, if this were to had continued, if it gets below 130 like that, gets down to 130, 120, coming from a real high solar flux like this, comes down below, you tend to get huge earthquakes like 7.0s. Okay, 6.8, 6.9, 7.0 plus. You get really big earthquakes down here as they get below this 130 mark, okay? So those are the three scenarios, or maybe one or two others I didn't include, okay? So take note of that. That's how we determine earthquakes. It happens quite often. So now, why am I forecasting that there might be an earthquake soon? Because right now we're at about 182, 83. So in the next, today, maybe even later today or tomorrow, we could cross over this 180 line. Okay, we could see an earthquake real soon here. Like I said, it doesn't always happen, but it happens a lot. So there might be an earthquake here. There might be a 6.0, a 6.5 earthquake. Occasionally you get a really big earthquake. But usually 180 mark, the earthquakes are a little bit, they're not usually the biggest ones, but they'll be like 6.0 to 6.5 in this area. And occasionally it will be bigger. So that's why I'm forecasting an earthquake in the next maybe day or two, or as much as 2 weeks. Okay? All right, so that's how we know the when, because solar flux is approaching a earthquake-prone number. Okay. All right. And we'll talk in the future about why is the solar flux, and the sun causing earthquakes? What is that mechanism? We'll talk about that in the future. Right now, I'm just kind of give you the basics, okay? Because this is kind of groundbreaking stuff that hasn't really been talked about, and I've been tracking it for a couple of years now, and I know now confidently I can say with high probability when earthquakes are going to happen. Again, it isn't 100% that it's always going to happen, but the probabilities are pretty high. And so we're kind of breaking ground here, new ground, and we're also in the infancy stage in some regards. Okay, so now let's talk about where this earthquake may take place. So now we know the when. Okay, so here are the places most likely the earthquake can take place. It doesn't mean this is the only places they could take place, but this is the most likely spots. And I kind of put them in order from the most likely to the least likely. Okay, so I believe this is pronounced Vanuatu. This is in the South Pacific. That's over in this area over here. Vanuatu is like here. There's also New Caledonia, which is a little bit south of here. It's like right in this area. Okay, so this is a really hot spot. You can see a lot of medium-sized earthquakes have been happening here lately. So Vanuatu and New Caledonia definitely on the list, probably the number one spot, or at least one of the hottest spots where we could see earthquake. Okay, the next place, the next in severity is Indonesia or Sumatra. So this is kind of the Indonesia area down in here. And also there's a little bit of activity going on just off the coast of, this is Sumatra right here, I believe. So we're kind of off the coast of Sumatra. So that's kind of tsunami area kind of stuff, right? All right, so that's so far has Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Indonesia here, and Sumatra over here. Okay. Since I'm over in this area, even though it's further down the list here, Japan up here. Quite a bit going on in Japan and some of the southern islands of Japan. That's on the list as well, but maybe a little less likely because there are not quite as many earthquakes up there as we've seen in these other spots, but it also could hit Japan. Okay. All right, I'm gonna spin the globe here a little bit. And we're gonna check out these other two spots, other three spots, Crete and the Americas. So I'm just letting this spin, and you can see we're coming through the continent of Africa here. And I'll just try to stop it here if I can. So Crete is right there. So it's just been one earthquake here, 5.3. So maybe not the most likely place that we could see an earthquake, but this is approximately where the island of Crete is. So it is on the list, so it needs to be mentioned. Okay, let's get this going over towards the Americas. Okay. Okay, so here we are. This has been a hot spot. We had a 7.4 earthquake here last week, maybe. I actually forecasted this earthquake to happen, and it did. So there's still a bit of a hot spot here in the central west coast. Let me get the little... Okay, there's still a hot spot here on the central west coast of South America. That's like Peru, I guess. That's this one right here. Okay. There is a bit of a hot spot here as well in Central America. There's several nations in there, so that's on the list as well, okay? So that pretty much covers it. There is couple other places that are kind of lingering, some small activity, or I should say lesser activity. I didn't really put them on the list, but these are the hot spots. Take note of it. These are the most likely places where we're going to see an earthquake. Anywhere from a 6.0 to 6.5 in the next 1 to 2 days, and maybe as much as 2 weeks. Okay, so for the next few days to week or two, these locations should be paying attention for a possible earthquake. And no, I'm not spreading fear, and I'm not trying to create panic, but I 100% believe we should forecast earthquakes if we can, and I believe we have arrived in a time in humanity that we can now predict earthquakes, the when and the where. The earthquake experts, well, what can I tell you? They're way behind. Okay, so that's it. Wanted to forecast that. I'll put this up on my YouTube channel as well as some other social media places for people that live in those locations. Pay attention, be prepared. All right, talk to you all again real soon next time.